Welcome to our another episode of Keeping Up with APID. We have everyone here, usual suspects. It is during lunch. My name is Chris Yang. My pronouns are he, him, his. Director of Mosaic and current chair of the APID Task Force. And just to share what I'm eating today, because it is during lunch, I have homemade popcorn chicken. Oh, that was me hitting my mic. Homemade popcorn chicken and milk tea. Shout out to Gold Shot. This isn't from Gold Shot. The cup is, but the tea is mine. Um, but yeah, so that's what I'm eating. Let's go to Anu.
Hi everyone, my name is Anu, pronoun she, her, hers. I'm the current AS Director of Academic Affairs and I'm an honorary part of this task force. Today I am continuing the bougie theme, but not as bougie. So my mom made aloo batang, which is like potato eggplant. I don't really like eggplant, so it's mostly potato. And then I have some onions, some mint chutney, and some roti or chapati, whatever you decide to call it. And I popcorn genie.
So hi again, my name is Jeannie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Today I'm eating a really weird combo. So I made creme brulee last night. No, I did not eat the whole thing right now. Like I had half, don't worry. And then I'm also eating some chips. But I guess it's Carl now.
Hi, my name is Parl. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I ate what I was supposed to save because I got really hungry. But I took a picture of it because it was like this bread and I put cheese and tomatoes on it. It was really fire, but I just ate that.
That's
but
okay.
not cherries. And then I passed to Sharon.
Hi everyone, it's Sharon Singh, pronoun she, her, hers. I'm the program coordinator of Mosaic Cross Cultural Center, and I'm also a honorary member, I guess, of the task force. I'm eating a weird combination, but not really. It's sausage, bell pepper, onions that I made for dinner last night as the protein, and then a salad, which is conveniently the Asian chopped salad from Costco. It's not pretty, so I don't want to show it too much.
That's fine. I mean, it's food needs to be filling and delicious, right? We're kind of doing this without any sort of outlines or anything, but I think one of the things that you know we can talk about that I think is important for us to talk about as APID identified folks is kind of our perception of achievement and also like how that plays into what we now can term as the model minority myth, right? So I guess just a quick 2-second thing. This idea of a model minority myth has existed in the United States for a couple decades now. And it's, attributed to mostly East Asian folks, sometimes Indian folks as well. But this idea of how we're looked at as like ideal quote unquote minorities because we work hard and we don't talk back and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of complex in a lot of ways because as an East Asian person, I have to say, on the one hand, it's terrible that we have this attributed to us and we have to fight back against it. And the other hand, I also have to kind of admit that I've gotten a lot out of it. My family's gotten a lot out of it. This concept of being treated a certain way because you look a certain way. I can't deny the fact that I've gotten power and resources out of this thing. So it's like a complex thing to talk about, and it's still one of the things that I think for a lot of our APIDA communities, particularly East Asians, particularly recent immigrants, it's still something that like folks have a hard time wrapping their head around. Um, because part of it is you do get a lot out of it, but part of it is also like in a lot of our Asian cultures we do have this mentality of like hard work equates to rewards, right? So as long as you work hard you get rewards. And like I'm specifically thinking about cultures like like Japanese culture or Korean culture where like people work in the same company for like 30, 40, 50 years, and like they eventually get rewarded for working that long as loyalty. We kind of conflate this kind of loyalty to like, oh, in the United States they say if you work hard you'll get places, and so because I've gotten places it's the result of my hard work. And it's kind of a complex thing for us as well. So kind of opening the floor up to folks, like what are your experiences with model minority myths? What are your experiences with like the sense of achievement or sense of like privilege that has come with it?
I think for me, it wasn't something that I knew about until I got to college, maybe even like towards the end of college of undergrad, that I realized that there was like these stereotypes or expectations placed on Asian communities. I remember, so I grew up in Fairfield, and I went to a high school that is very close to a military base, an air base, and our career center did mostly like recruitment things. But I got tracking is part of the model minority myth, and I got tracked into a lot of honors and AP classes. And I remember having recruiters coming to our high school, especially towards like the end of the the school year, and like talking to us about our options, and that was about it. And I remember the conversations with my family was definitely, you're going to college, but as immigrants, my parents had never experienced the system here, so I really had to figure out and navigate a lot of it on my own. And like the only reason I took the SATs and any of the tests that you need to take is because my friends were taking them. And they were like, yeah, we signed up on Saturday. Like, we're all doing it. Do you want to sign up too? And I was like, okay. But otherwise, I would not have signed up for any of these tests. I would not have taken any of the like AP tests unless like my friends were taking them. I didn't join a lot of like activities until my friends were like, yeah, we're doing this because it looks good on college applications. And now, I think it's very interesting because when my graduate studies was in higher education student affairs, and, identifying a specific islander, Indian, like Indo-Fijian, and looking at the statistics of how islanders, like the graduation rates for islanders to even get to undergrad and graduate is like 3%, right here in the Bay Area in California. And I sit there and I wonder, like, how are educational systems tracking students, right, based on these stereotypes and perceptions that feed into the model minority myth? But it's also like, what are ways that we have these conversations, right? Because like Chris is saying, like we do definitely benefit because we are expected or like look a certain way based on those expectations, but I think we really have to dissect what that means as far as like resources and the like reality for all Asian communities here in the United States.
I guess for me, I always knew about the model minority myth because where I went to high school, like that was manifested to like a very big extent. I went to Monte Vista High School in Cupertino, but I live in East Side San Jose, so like that's, I would drive all the way over there, and it's like a big culture shift when you like go from just, it's only like 10 miles, but literally like you literally go from a place that isn't as like funded, isn't as pretty, and then you go to like suburbia, where there's a really big Asian population. And so my high school was very academically driven. It was like, if you're not taking AP classes, you're wasting your time. Or if you're like sports, we weren't good at sports. Our football team sucked. But our academics, we were stellar. Like Monta Vista was rated really highly. And I guess for me, the stereotype really manifested as early as like third grade. There's like a specific story I remember. It's a little triggering because it does use like the stereotype of model minority against Asians. So like we had a math test, and one of my non-Asian classmates stole like my Asian best friend's test, and they saw that like she didn't do as well, and they laughed at her and then like ran around the classroom telling everyone, oh, it was a boy. He was like, I'm smarter than an Asian for once. And it was like, I don't know, I was only in third grade, but I really wish I spoke up, because I was like, this boy is like being super rude to my friend. Like my friend was crying, and I don't know, I feel like that label of smart, it is very privileging, but at the same time, like it creates a lot of tension between different minorities. Like it's used to pit minorities against each other. And then it's also like this label, Asians are smart. And then people kind of justify it. They're like, who doesn't want to be labeled as smart? Like use it to your advantage. And that's something that I didn't really appreciate about the minority myth. And then as like a multiracial, multi-ethnic Asian, I didn't feel like I fit into it a lot, but I was like stereotyped into it. And I would say it's really affected me. Like my parents definitely really believe that education is a way to move up in society. Like it's a social mobility like chain that you can go through, and you can automatically like, by getting education, you raise your socioeconomic status, you raise your place in society. And so that's how it was internalized, both in like my educational sphere and like my friend group, because it was mostly Asians, and then also in my family. So I feel like I've lived the model minority myth a lot. And then recently in my internship with it's called the Poly, so it's the Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. I mentor college students, and we've like really broken down what the model minority myth is, because we've been trying to show like the privilege of that stereotype, and at the same time like how that stereotype has broken down the community with like mental health stigma, and like children as they're put into this like very educationally intensive sort of environments. That was kind of long, but yeah.
Okay, I feel like mine is so layered, like so many different aspects of this, but I was always like not the brightest, like, or not the smartest, and I've always like been, or people have always assumed that I'm like really really smart, or I do really really good in my classes, and I'm just like an average student. I went to a really big APID identifying high school, so I feel like everybody was at a much higher level of stress, and like I don't know, everybody felt like they need to, I felt like felt like they needed to be like stereotypical jobs. Like I feel like nursing was a really big one for us, and engineering. Like I don't know why, but those were like one or the other, you had to do it, or like you weren't it. I don't know. That was kind of my upbringing. I was compared by my parents a lot to my peers, but I just never really was like academically strong, and I feel like that's where like that was my like that's how people saw me. So yeah, that was kind of my experience.
I feel like I had a mixture of everything that both Parl and Anupam mentioned. I feel like I also went to a pretty like decent like high school in terms of like how people were very on top of like their academics. I think Cache Valley is like known amongst like Asian parents, especially like when I first started in the district. Like it used to be like a really well known like, oh, this is a really good school district, and a lot of like Asian parents actually want to move to Cache Valley specifically for the school district. I haven't really looked at the stats to see if it's actually that good recently, but like that's kind of like the reason why my parents actually wanted to move to Cache Valley when we were looking for places to move. And I feel like growing up, like I've never been good at academics, and like a lot of people kind of like see my identity and like expect me to be good at like all these academic related things, especially like in math. Like I sucked at math. Like I hate geometry, I hate math, and like I hate like anything related to STEM. And like I feel like my parents especially got really frustrated with me growing up because I sucked at math, like even like from a really young age. And like my dad would try to like help me, but like it's really hard because like he doesn't understand like the standard of math like here, and like the way like that it's being taught is very different from how he learned it. And so like I feel like we had like that language barrier in a way, even though I understand what he was like saying. And like I kind of saw that they were just trying to help, but I just got frustrated easy. And like my mom also put me into Kumon, like a lot of Asian kids were, and I feel like I didn't live up to the par that like my parents wanted me to be like excelling in academics. And that's where I also physically and mentally, emotionally got frustrated. Like I feel like I'm also a very like stubborn personality too. So like even though my parents compare me to like other students around me or like my peers, I'm just like always firing back like, but I do well in all these other things, or like, you know, things like that. But it just never seemed to like live up to that. And like even now, like I'm surprised I made it through college, right? Because thank God I picked like social science and prep for teaching, because like I only have to take like 2 like semesters of math. But like if I were to do any other like subjects or things like that, or like other majors, I think that's also the reason why I ended up sticking with my major, because I was so scared that I was going to switch to a major that required a lot of math, that I would have to start over and take more math classes. But I feel like that's also like a standard that like I have to constantly face, because I feel like I'm constantly challenged by other people to think that I'm smart. Because like even now they're like, yeah, I don't know how well you do in like your academics and like also balance all these like on campus like involvement. And I'm like, you don't even know, my grades aren't as high as you think they are. And like I just like there's like so many semesters going in that like I just didn't want to care about my academics, because like it just brought me stress. I don't want to think about it, I just want to get by. Like I just care about my campus involvement. Like it's the only thing that brings me peace. But like yeah, that's just me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely relate to a lot of what y'all are saying, especially Eugenie, like in terms of like, you know, being afraid that you're stereotyped a certain way or being like perceived a certain way. I think for me, like it wasn't so pronounced in high school because I also went to high school in the same district that Nick did. I went to Limbrook, which was in the Cupertino School District. Technically Fremont Union High School District is what it's called, but it's in Cupertino. Um, and of course, like 20 years apart. But like, um, it was a very academically driven school and a very like Asian identifying school, right? Like we had like at the time I was a student there, we had like something like 70 something percent Asian identified students, and now I think the number is closer to like 80 something percent of the students in the high school are Asian identified. And so like it was very much like a high achieving school, a very like kind of homogenous school, like very similar upbringings. Not to discount the diversity within the Asian diaspora, there's a lot of diversity, but at the same time, there's a similar kind of mindset that kind of went throughout that school. um and so that wasn't really a problem for me because when you're in a homogenous environment, you can kind of forge your own identity without worrying about what people are attributing to you. But it wasn't until like I graduated high school and I went off to college and I went you know into like the quote unquote real world, that there was a lot more of this like, oh, because I'm Asian, you perceive me as somebody who's good at math or computers or that kind of thing. And it doesn't help that like my age and location actually makes me good at computers. Like, you know, growing up in the Silicon Valley in the late 90s, early 2000s, like we did play with computers a lot and we did have a lot of experience with like technology. And so like I actually can answer your tech question. But are you asking me because you think I know, or are you asking me because like I'm Asian, right? Like, and there's always that kind of voice in the back of my head that's like, oh, this is like kind of messed up, you know. So yeah, it's really difficult because like, you know, I majored in literature in undergrad, and you know, part of that was because I really didn't want to do computers for a living, even though that's what everyone did in my high school, and that was really the smart thing to do financially. Like, you know, a lot of my like classmates now work for tech companies and stuff, and you know, are doing a lot better than I am, in terms of like financial security or whatever. But like, you know,
You're not doing well as an educator?
I know, right? Shocking. Shocking. So yeah, I think God, it's a lot of things, right? And it's like Parl said, it's complex, right? Like it's super complex, it's super layered. And part of the problem with the mono minority myth is it doesn't leave room for like depth. You know, like you get perceived a certain way, and then you're not allowed to fight back against that and say, well, you know, like actually I'm good at computers because I like computers, but I don't like math, I don't like science, and like, you know, actually, you know, I'm a lit major and I like reading and writing a lot more, and you know, it's like stuff like complexity like that really kind of like isn't appreciated within a model minority context.
And we're not saying that just because you're good at math or tech or sciences that like, you know, you're a good Asian or bad. Like I think that's
Right.
where we
Right.
get hung up, right? This like good Asian versus bad Asian mentality that really feeds into this model minority myth, right? And it's a myth for a reason. It's in the name, yet we still really hold on to it. And I think like that's where like I actually went into San Jose State as a chemical engineering major and like planned on going into biotech, you know, switched to molecular biology when I was faced with some troubles, and then very quickly realized that, you know, I really like working with people. I really like, you know, having these conversations with college students and figuring out like how to be the person that I needed getting through the educational system, right? So like your life path, just because you are good at something or there are expectations on you, like you get to decide that too. And hopefully we've reached that stage in 2020 as well.
Yeah,
But
we
just-
actually have other criteria that judges whether you're good or bad Asians.
yeah, that's true.
Joking.
I feel like alongside the model minority myth, we kind of have to talk about tiger parenting. Because my freshman year, I had a white literature teacher, and he decided to have us read like Amy Tan's article on tiger parenting. And like during it, his wife was pregnant, his wife was Asian, and he was like, yeah, like I'm not gonna let my wife do what this article says. Like I'm gonna let my child have a good childhood. And I was like, are you saying like every Asian mom is a type? Like that's a very bad stereotype in itself. And like people always attribute people's success to like, oh, their parents are strict, their parents are hard, and that's why they're so successful. Like they don't get to have fun. Which I find like I'm just like, why are you boxing every Asian family into this mold that isn't true at all? And so like when I was when I was freshman year, I was like to my literature teacher, I was like, why do you think that about your wife? Like, don't you have these conversations about parenting? And like he didn't like me at all. Okay, he gave me an A minus, which is equivalent of an Asian F, just so y'all know. And I was just like, bro, I'm just saying facts here. Like, why are you attributing this to your wife? And I feel like tiger parenting is a really hot topic.
Yeah, for sure. Just to clarify too, I mean, I don't know if Amy Tan wrote anything about tiger parenting, but the article that you're mentioning, I think, was written by Amy Chua, who then also wrote a book. So she wrote an article and then wrote a book based on the article called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom, I think. about her own personal experiences, and like really started a conversation.
I think the second part of this question, Chris, you'd asked is like our stance or like our views on affirmative action. And I think, you know, I pulled it up because affirmative action is very nuanced. Um, so, affirmative action in the context of the allocation of resources or employment, the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to groups known to have been discriminated against previously. So that's like the generic way of defining affirmative action. But I honestly, for me, like this policy was such a band-aid when it first came out, right? And I just feel like we can do so much better. um, right? Because also like Asians are used in the tool or as tools like for affirmative action, right? And we're seen as like bringing diversity, but the good kind of diversity. So I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
I mean, I agree with you, Sharon, that like affirmative action is not like the end all be all. Like certainly like the conversation doesn't end with affirmative action, and it shouldn't. And also we have to acknowledge the fact that like we haven't actually gotten very far fixing the thing that affirmative action was technically supposed to fix.
Yeah.
Just because we have affirmative action policies or have had affirmative action policies for the last 10 or 20 years in this country didn't actually change very much. In terms of like culture, right? Like, yeah, you might be able to have said that your numbers increased, but it doesn't actually change the inclusion aspect, nor does it change the mentality behind why those numbers are so terrible in the first place, right? So just because you have more people of color in a space doesn't necessarily mean you're a more inclusive space. Yeah. So wanting to say that, like, you know, affirmative action, while not great, is also like, like needs to keep happening. Like it's not, it hasn't fixed anything yet.
I want to say, like, the part I like about affirmative action is not even the race part, it's the resources part. Like the admissions process, looking at like a student and saying, hey, do you have access to, like, I don't know, like tutoring, or like, did you have access to like to do sports, or were you did you have like a second job to support your family? Like that's the aspect of affirmative action that I really believe in. And I feel like that needs to be, you know, that needs to be increased. Like I would like to see more recruitment of folks from high schools, not just like this by the time like they're applying for college. I feel like, yeah, that's good, but it's a little late. Like you should be going out to high schools, you should be reaching out to students, and especially by POC, and that's where the race aspect comes in for me. But I think that like some people see affirmative action as bad, quote unquote, in the Asian American community, because they're like, oh, that means that it's counted against us, we're not going to get into school. And I know there have been like Supreme Court cases about that. Like people have sued the UCs, people have sued like Harvard, because they're like, you're using this against me. And I think that's an issue, like, because again, we're pitting minorities against each other, and by doing that we're dragging everyone down. And I think that like through the liberation of others, you're also liberated, which isn't like always focused on in the Asian American community. They're like, why should I focus on someone else's struggles when I have my own kind of mentality?
I was gonna say, everything Anoop said is basically was what I was gonna say, because I went to a really big APIDA high school, APIDA like population high school, and I remember that when everybody was applying for like colleges, like our counselors kind of told us like, since you guys are a majority and you guys all have around the same GPAs, you know, don't expect to get into these schools. They're highly competitive in California now. and everybody thought, oh, because we're Asian, like it's gonna be harder for us to get in. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's how I remember seeing it at the time. But I remember everybody was like, oh, affirmative action, like it makes it harder for us to get in because we're Asian. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's like what I thought. And then now that I'm in college and looking back, I see why it's necessary, and I see how like people with um much tougher circumstances still don't get what they should be getting or the support they should be getting. But in high school, I didn't understand that. So yeah, that's my experience.
I think for me, I also very much agree with like what Noop and Pearl had just shared. I don't feel like I personally seen examples of affirmative actions amongst my peers, like the conversations at like the counselor's part. But I do feel like there's incidents where like I could see how it would have reflected better with affirmative action. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that affirmative action is there for a reason, right? But I think it goes back to what Anoop was saying, right? Like it needs to be a little bit more like thought out so that access is given, or the way access is determined is different. You know, I just feel like that's the part that leaves it really broad. And that's when you get the what's that case in Texas? Quite recently. Anyway, I forgot. If I can find it. Anyway, yeah, but it leaves it for folks to say like, well, we're not going to get in because we get access because we have the GPAs or we have the test scores to prove that we are fine.
Yeah, I think like you brought up, Anoop, we get used as test cases for stuff like Supreme Courts because I feel like white supremacy weaponizes the Asian identity in that way. And white supremacy doesn't want affirmative action around, right? So there's this kind of like sneaky like, oh, like get the Asians on your side.
Abigail Fisher versus
Yeah.
University of Texas. That's the case that I was thinking of.
Thank you. Actually, Abigail Fisher is I believe identifies as white and not Asian. Like that the white supremacy kind of system of power kind of weaponizes Asian identity in that fight. And I think we have to remember that like those individual cases are not examples of why affirmative action should be abolished, right? Like those individual cases, if you find merit in those cases, I would say offer examples of why affirmative action needs to be like expanded or tightened up or maybe clarified, but not reasons why affirmative action needs to be gotten rid of, right? Like and like systemic inequities still exist, prevalently throughout all of education. And to say that like the first step of getting equity in education is not getting rid of affirmative action. The first step of getting equity in education is to address like racism and sexism. It's to address like inherent bias and like Anoop said, access to resources, right? Like classism. That's how you do it. You don't get rid of the one of the tools that's trying to fix it. And I think that's something that the Asian community, like there are members of Asian communities that need to like examine, right? Like not to put it on everyone. The other thing too that it brings to mind is that it's important for us to disaggregate the Asian identity, right? So we have this Asian diaspora that includes everything from like, Korea and Japan all the way over to like maybe even like Turkey or, Afghanistan. And like there's so many different cultures within that swath, you know, and not only cultures, but like ultimately, like individuals within that range get treated very differently in the United States, and so like resources aren't distributed the same, and like achievement like isn't measured the same. So saying that like this entire region of the world all falls under the same category is like kind of messed up. And is also one of the reasons why the affirmative action conversation needs to be a lot more complicated than rather than simplified.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's really weird when we fill out our college apps and our only option is like Asian. Like there isn't really any depth to that. There's so many different types. I do think there's a Pacific Islander option, but it's mostly just Asian. And then I was also gonna say, I feel like it's weird that I don't know, like that's just so broad. I don't know. That's my comment.
I definitely agree with that. And like, I saw recently that like the APID identity or category has like the largest wealth gap. So we have um like Chinese Americans, Asian Indians at the top, and then like Cambodian Americans, like lower income on the bottom, and like that's never addressed. That's never like broken down for me. Like I always see pie charts, I always see like graphs, and it's like Asian as a whole, and I feel like that's not really fair um, to group it all together because experiences, you know, are so different, are so vast, and like that's kind of how I feel about like East Side San Jose as well. Like um our community is so diverse, and like that's not very like addressed here. Like we don't really talk about how there are the lower income folks, and then there are the higher income. Like we just talk about the Pan Asian identity, which we do need to do because you know we are only like 5% of the US population, so we need that coalition building for power. But like at the same time, people are being hurt by the model minority myth, by like that wealth gap, and that's not being addressed either.
I was gonna say that I've also seen that poll, and it goes from like 33,000 a year income to like 150 between like all these racial identities. So yeah, I completely agree. It's just too broad to be in one category like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think, you know, even part of understanding that too is that like we like representation is such an important part of trying to get Asian identity recognized in different spaces. And like even in, you know, this task force currently, you know, we don't all like we have experiences that aren't being met, right, that, or aren't spoken for, right. And not to say that we have a specific identity or whatever that we need to like bring in, but that there are people who like have experiences that, you know, we can't really speak for, you know, who are either, you know, our international students, or people who were raised, you know, at a certain like kind of socioeconomic status, or people who, you know, might have darker skin or these other kind of characteristics that like, you know, because the Asian Pan Asian identity is so broad that like, you know, it's really difficult for one small like group of folks to be able to speak to the vast experiences of all of them. So let me ask a question about San Jose State then. Um, one question is like, what are your experiences with coming to San Jose State as students? Right, like I'm the only person on this in this group that was never a student at San Jose State. So like, you know, was this like a school you were excited to come to? Was it a school you weren't excited to come to? What did you know about the school? And then two, the other question is like your own individual experiences with like undergraduate college like application, right? Or transferring college applications. Like how did that go for you? Did you know what you were doing? Did you not know what you were doing? Like how did you get information about like how to apply or how to transfer or how to like matriculate?
Lucky for me, I had a sibling that went through it right before, so my family kind of knew what to expect, and I chose a local school, so it wasn't really like a huge deal. I want to say San Jose State was really refreshing for me because I had never been around or had never like had classmates that were Punjabi because I actually went to a Catholic school. So I had a lot of APID identifying students, but not anybody like me. So it was nice to finally see that. Um, that was my experience. I got lucky and I had good teachers who sent me the right path, luckily.
So I was part of the APID program when I was in high school, not as like a student, but as like a tutor. So I kind of got the benefits from it just in the essence that like I kind of heard about like all the college tracks that I could take. I kind of knew very earlier on that I didn't want to be in a UC because not because like there's anything that I'm really against it. I just feel like I wouldn't thrive there. I think that the population there is a lot bigger than like any other schools that I was looking into. And a lot of like my friends were also applying the year before to San Jose State. And so because of their experience, I kind of had like a better insight of like what I needed to do. Um, and also I was applying to CSU, East Bay, and Sac State because those were campuses I've like one, I live really close by East Bay, but also I've been to SAC for like a leadership program conference kind of thing. So I feel like I wanted to choose a campus that I felt like the most comfortable at in a way, because I've never really been away from home for like a really long time. And like that was like a part that scared me. And like the idea of being stuck at home while being at East Bay also scared me. So I chose like San Jose State mainly maybe because like I've already been there a couple of times with like my friends to like visit and things like that. And like I felt like, okay, this is like where I feel like I would thrive. I actually didn't apply with the intentions thinking like, oh, I'll be with like a lot of APIDA students. I feel like it just came with it. And like I didn't actually like really realize that was like the biggest population like number until like I was an orientation leader and like um Kathy Wong Lau from the Title IX and Diversity Office actually was doing a presentation, right? And then she's like, yeah, did you know that like San Jose State is one of the biggest like APIDA like population? And I was like, wait, what? Like that's so cool. Like to me, like that's when I started feeling really prideful because before I was just going like, you know, like whatever. And after I realized and I learned that, I was like, wow, I picked the right school. And then yeah, and then now I'm here.
My admissions process was a little weird. So I, like Parul, had older siblings who've been through it. But then so I applied to like a bunch of like I applied to privates, I applied, you know, like all the terms like safeties, reaches, dreams. I applied to my dreams, and then I applied to some UCs. And then straight up, they were just too expensive. I actually got into Berkeley, but people call that Monte Vista 2.0. So I was like, no, no, thank you. I don't want to experience that again. And I'm really glad I didn't go actually. Like, I feel like that was one of my best decisions I've ever made. So I kind of just ended up at San Jose State. Like I didn't pick it, but like when I looked at all the other schools I got into, thought about like financials and then like thought about like the culture there, I was like, okay, I guess San Jose State's the one. So it was kind of like process by elimination. But I feel good about San Jose State, and then I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh, why can't you all do that better? And like, let me clarify that. I feel like I have never been around such a like diverse group of people. Um, Definitely coming from like just an Asian American kind of like high school, and then going to San Jose State, and seeing like more like APIDA folks, but then also seeing more like Black folks, seeing more Latinx folks. I liked that aspect. What I don't like is that like a lot of our professors are white, and that our advising kind of sucks. And then those are like things for me. Like I feel like my professor I had for Chem 1B, she's Puerto Rican, and so like I really, you know, vibed with her. Like I was like, ooh, POC teaching my chem class, be my friend, lead me, mentor me. And something like she confided in me later. She's like, I feel the burden of a lot of POC students coming to me because, you know, there's not a lot of POC people in STEM fields. And like, especially in our university, it's a lot of white people teaching it. So that was something that like I wish San Jose State did better. But I didn't like apply to schools looking at faculty and being like, are you more diverse or less diverse? If anyone's listening and they're applying to college right now, go to CC, go to community college. It's free, 2 years. You're getting the same experience, and then transfer because the money ain't worth.
Okay, I have something to add onto that. I was always used to like people of color educators. Like I was very lucky. I had mostly Latin and Black educators growing up, and that's why I feel like I was always guided well because they were always super like supportive and understanding. And then I came to San Jose State, and I feel like all the business professors I don't think I've had, or maybe I've had one POC, but the rest have all been white, and it's a completely different experience. I don't know if that's just college or what, but yeah, it's a weird feeling for sure, and I feel like they're not that supportive or care, from my experience. And I was gonna say that, yeah, if you're gonna pick a college or between a CSU or a UC, bang for your buck and the diversity, I would go for SJSU if you're not already thinking about community, to be honest. Because to me, and comparing to my friends' experiences who went to different private universities or universities with less diversity, it was tough. It was tough going from a very people of color school to not one at all. So, my experience.
Can I just add to first of all, I love that you brought that up, Nick, because about Monte Vista, because Lynbrook used to think of Berkeley as Lynbrook 2.0 too. And we used to say we had when I was in school, we used to say that the intro CS classes at Berkeley were like Lynbrook reunions, because there were just so many Lynbrook people in the class. But the other thing that I want to bring up more to the point of what you two were talking about, is like, on the institutional end of things, oftentimes, we really talk about like, oh, like we need, like we need to do what students want us to do, which 99% of the time is true. Like you need to ask students like, what do you need, what do you want, how do you address your needs, and that kind of stuff. But then there's that 1% of the time when like students don't realize that what they're missing is what they're missing. And like, you know and sometimes folks who don't want to make institutional change will hide behind that. And like and one of the classic examples is having faculty and staff of color on your campus. And folks will say, well, students don't really care if we have faculty of color, or nobody has said that on a survey, right? And it's like, well, yeah, part of that though is because the students don't realize that's what they're missing, and like, but we know, right? Like we like people who are in institutions of higher education know that like not having faculty that reflect your student population is a problem. But folks will fall back and be like, well, like that wasn't on a survey. And it's like, okay, but like let's also admit that as professionals we know that that's a problem and we need to fix it.
Yeah, let's put that on the survey. It's so like, it's so interesting hearing this because I went to San Jose State from 2008 to 2013. So it's been a minute. I actually went to community college, and my plan was to transfer to UC Davis. Right, and I went from like having A's and B's in high school and taking honors in AP classes and being really motivated educationally, and then I think I got to community college and I got like F's and D's. And I think if you're going to go the community college route, you really have to take it seriously and put find your resources, find your community even at community college, right? It's very easy to just go take your class and leave because sometimes the infrastructure to get involved isn't as clear. I feel like, at least it wasn't for me when I went to community college. It's probably different now, which is great, but you know, any university you go to, you have to find ways to really engage with your education and your campus, right? And to figure out how to network. And I just did not know how to do any of that to begin with, but it was just so much harder. And every single time I'd go to an advisor and be like, I don't think I'm supposed to be in this class. They'd be like, no, you need to take this class in order to go to this school. And it wasn't like a conversation that I could have about what my options were, right? So I think very early on, you know, connect to the campus you want to transfer to eventually, because yeah, it's more bang for your buck, but it's a waste of time and money if you don't get towards your goal at the end of it, you know. So I will say that when I came to San Jose State, I had a much better experience of finding resources and community. I think along with what Pearl was saying, I did not come in knowing, or Jeannie was saying, like, I did not know that this was a very large, you know, Asian community at San Jose State. Had no clue. Didn't think twice about the faculty. None of that was on my purview. The reason why I chose to come to San Jose State is because their biotech program was one of the highest ranking. And at the time, it was one of those feeder programs to Biorad and Genentech and some of the, you know, biotech companies. And I also could see, like, you know, San Jose State does work very closely with our, you know, Silicon Valley companies. And my end goal was to work. And, you know, I wanted to really research in finding ways to cure cancer. That was my goal. And make it so that we had sustainable, like, you know, energy fuels and all of that. And now I'm not doing any of that, but, you know, it's still some of my passion. And I think, you know, my connection to, you know, resource centers and the faculty that I did have, right? I think it's very interesting because, you know, in the social sciences, you do find POC faculty. And I think that's what I really needed to realize what I wanted to do in the future. Because anytime someone would ask me, well, why do you want to go into engineering or science? I'd be like, well, I want to help people. I just didn't realize what that meant in my own skill set. And I'm really grateful that San Jose State was able to kind of help me figure that out.
Wait, I agree with you because I was thinking back. I was like, wait, I actually had a lot of like POC like teachers and professors here at San Jose State. So that makes sense. You're right.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your college, right? And like what your major is, which is unfortunate that we don't see enough faculty and staff in colleges that tend to be geared towards maybe what's the word? Not like economic prestige, but like the fields that just cost a lot of money to go through, right? Like, as if you're already a you know, person that is trying to figure out ways to gain access to higher education, and then you don't see someone already there to help guide you, like what Pearl was saying, right? Like, you're just gonna find a harder time, right? Like, statistics show that, research shows that. um I mean, it would be great to have folks like Anoop who make it to the field come back, right, and give back to colleges and mentor, right? Even if they're not faculty, but like they're still able to establish something, so that even if we don't see it within our classroom, we can see it being facilitated through our campuses and our colleges. I think that would be great.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of STEM fields, you know, the reason why we don't have a lot of faculty of color is not necessarily because the ones who make it don't want to come back, but it's also that, like, there just aren't that many who make it, you know?
Yeah.
Like folks of color, or folks from like historically underrepresented backgrounds, like they're just not allowed to get through like STEM fields. You know, they're judged harsher, they're tested harsher, they're held to a higher standard than white folks, and as a result, they don't make it. You know, and I think like part of widening that pipeline is we got to push more people through that pipeline in order to, like, once you have more people through that pipeline, then there'll be more people who come back and teach, because there'll be more people on the other end. It's like numbers, right? Like, but when you're like the one Black person that made it through the chemistry program, and for the school to be like, okay, you're the one Black person making it through the chemistry program, now we need you to come back and teach. It's like, well, I mean, you had one guy, like,
Right.
let that person go make a living. But
Right.
like, yeah, so I think we definitely need to do a much better job of opening that pipeline up, and or dismantling it altogether.
Wait, I have a question. Do y'all think that there's not a lot of like people coming back that we had hope, like in terms of like representation, is also because like where we're located, like in terms of like Silicon Valley? Because like, you know how like I hear a lot, especially like during hiring committees and stuff, like, oh, like blah 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 didn't end up like going through with it, or like ends up dropping because like it's too expensive to live here. And like I feel like that's also maybe a part of a factor why we don't end up getting the crowd that we had anticipated or hoped for or want, but I don't know. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Being an educator and living in the Bay Area is really, really hard, right? It's hard as it is, but to how Chris was saying, like, to have that one Black student make it through a STEM field and then ask them to come and teach for like PDEDs, that doesn't make sense. When you can have that person go out into the field, get compensated for the amount of time, energy, and resources and money that it took for that student to get through the system, right? So I mean, it doesn't make sense. I think our educators, our faculty aren't paid enough, not just at San Jose State, but anywhere.
I was gonna add that the one or two business professors I did have that were of color, they taught night class because they worked during the day. So a lot of our programs in business were night classes. Like you would have a night class at least once or twice a week, if yeah, especially for my upper divisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it is because of that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we definitely, and I think we can talk about gentrification as a topic of another podcast, but, like the cost of living here definitely is, really makes it really bad for like our educators, for anybody who's not working in, like, just to generalize, for anyone not working in like the medical field, the tech field, or business, it's nearly impossible to live here, like without other sort of like incomes, right? So it's to ask somebody to live in San Jose and be a teacher, a social worker, work at a nonprofit, um, be a barista, like these, like it's impossible.
In grad school, my cohort members and I would joke about finding sugar daddies because we knew we were going into education, and like we were like in San Francisco. I was like, we got to do something because we're not gonna survive. But there were many times that I had the website open while writing that research paper, because it's tough. It is so tough.
Yeah, I mean, the struggle's real.
Yeah.
I talk about that now too, like especially on Instagram, some like sugar daddy profiles like would follow me, and I'm like, oh my god, especially like the first month after I graduated, I feel like they followed me, and I was telling Anoop and like Floor, I was like, oh my god, they knew I graduated and they knew I'm broke, like they knew. But I never went through with it because like my friend and I were saying, like, if they're rich enough to like sponsor you and like give you money, they're rich enough to find you if you're trying to escape and like hide away from them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are definitely downfalls, and way too many women of color are going missing.
Yeah,
for any of us to mess with that, but
Yeah, this podcast officially does not endorse
no, it does
getting
not.
a sugar. Like, they're predatory. They're creepy. Don't.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't do
They're
it.
all old white
Also,
men
San
from Spain.
Jose, San Jose, biggest ring for sex trafficking. I said what I said.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. And I believe that those people who were talking about God at the beginning of the semester, I forgot what their name was, but they were all females and they were all weird. And I think they were trying to sex traffic us. I don't remember what their name was.
I know what you're talking about though, because like when I was in high
They
school,
were so creepy. They would follow students to their
Yeah, in the student union. They would follow you in the student union too. Like, that is creepy.
yeah, in high school we learned a lot about like human trafficking through our club because that was one of our projects. And after that, I'm just like, oh no, like I've been very cautious everywhere I go. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
at like an open campus, I feel like that could be another topic, to be honest.
Yeah.
We can definitely have that be. And this task force nor this podcast disparages other student organizations. Student organizations are allowed to be what they are, so don't worry about it. I just want to throw that in there because I don't want a student org to come after us. Okay, so wrapping up. This has been a fun discussion. Thank you all for sharing. Any final thoughts on like model minority, on getting to college? Anything you want to share, or anything that came up that you haven't shared yet?
I know we talked a lot about like colleges and things like that. I just want to be like, and like community college route, just like do your research. Don't like listen based solely off of us because everyone's situation is very different. And like if you want to go to a 4-year, do that. If you don't like want to do that, go to community or like do something. Do like a vocational school, technical school, whatever floats your boat. And like just know that like I'm not good at education and like here I am, I made it. So like you could do it too. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I want to echo off of that. Like, I think, is it harder to gain access and have opportunities if you don't have a degree? Yes. Is it impossible? No. Like, we have all different paths that we need to take. I personally just feel like affirmative action, model minority myth, they make, for certain communities, they make it just so much harder and so much better, right? And there is a lot of pitting of communities against each other. And so, do your research. I know that the APIDA task force has an Instagram, SJSU APIDA, and, they've been posting things around affirmative action, model minority myth, and they have resources, to kind of deep dive for yourself. So I would, highly suggest folks to do their research.
Yeah, for sure. And shout out to Ginny and Parl for being the ones that are running the PETA Instagram. Y'all are crushing it. It's awesome. Thanks.
It's very cute. I love the aesthetics of the highlights. Love it.
Carl's idea though. Shout out to you for, putting it out.
I mean, you did it, but yeah.
Teamwork. It's a teamwork thing. Whatever.
Are we gonna take a picture?
Ooh.
Wait, hold on. Let's sign off. Okay, so no final thoughts or anything past this. Then, thanks for joining us this time. We will be back next week with something else. So we'll see you then. In the meantime, hit us up on Instagram, hit us up through email. We're around SJSU PETA on Instagram. So yeah.
Also, if you'd like to be on the podcast, on this video podcast, let us know.
Yeah.
Down below or like message us, DM us, Just thought.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.